for the folks in here, so I don't cover their, no, that's not what I want to do. Thank you very much. Okay. Let me just make sure this is all okay. I think it'll be less obtrusive down there. All right, so nope, not gonna work. Fine. No, now it won't change. That's hilarious. Electronics for you. So this is the big elephant in the room right now. Our drought situation. That's what we were talking about over here. I don't know if you guys heard it, and thankfully I've got printouts in here because that's the little digits are hard to read, but the colors are pretty obvious. They finally got us into severe, which is what we needed. I mean, nobody wants to be in extreme or severe drought, but the reason that's important is if you're a producer and you're trying to get any help from the government if they declare disaster in this area because of the drought, you have to have proof that your area was in drought. And so we really need this to accurately reflect the rainfall. So it is a little better this time than it has been the last, 2 or 3. So finally, we're getting a little more accurate record of that. But as you can see, it's a lot redder than it was the week before. I try to share this every week while drought is an issue for us. I try to, come on in, Tom. I try to share it, and just so that people can be aware of what's going on and the state of the whole area. It doesn't matter, wherever you want to sit, sir, is good for me. So this shows on your statistics in front of you, you'd be able to read the week to week changes or week to month changes. I hate to see that so much of the state is in D4. It's not as much as it was 3 months ago, which I find interesting, but more than it was last week, which we know from our current situation. Anyway, so that's that. The outlook for these drought figures is actually not very good. The outlook shows continuity of the drought for a little while, and I actually don't have any. I wasn't able to get to a place where I saw rainfall really anticipated in enough to break the drought. So is that too loud for you guys in here? Because I can shut the door if it is. So what this is I just took, all we have in summary right now for East Texas is January through July. So I just took January through July of 2022, 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018. Then I went 2015, and then I went all the way back to 2011, which all of us are like, ooh, 2011. That was brutal. And we're actually, of those years, we are the closest to 2011 of any recent years, which we all know, knowing that. Sometimes it's easy to go, it didn't seem like it was, this, or it was wetter than this, or it was drier than this. I find this to be very interesting. When you look at these figures, in June of 2019, we got 7 inches of rain. In July of 2021, we got 5.5. So I think that's really interesting. If you take the whole year in total, of course, when you look at 2019 and obviously at 2015, we're way over the average. Our average in East Texas is 52 inches a year. Here in Cherokee County, that's about our average. In 2011, I think we got 32 inches. In 2015, we got 76, which is how we come to the average of 72. So because we have that often, they've been measuring those for these rainfall measurements go back to 1968 on the East Texas Drought Monitor website. So anyway, interesting information and cool to kind of look at what the summaries are for the months. Okay. So what does this matter in terms of our gardening? For fall gardening, it matters in regards to how you're going to water your garden. Okay. If you were here when we talked about drought and water, then, you know, we're looking at, do you have rainfall catchment? Are you using your gray water? Because both of those can work really well, not the rainfall so much unless you're in one of those areas that got some. But your gray water usage can be really useful. My mother has converted her washing machine so that she only washes on cold water. She uses appropriate liquid soap that's not harsh. And she actually uses her gray water to water her rose bed and stuff like that up there. So she gets plenty of water that way. But the stuff in the front yard is a whole other story, because that's city water. And in Wells, which is where we live, the city water is heavily fluorinated. And that's actually a big issue for any of you guys listening. Chlorine is a major issue in looking at growing your vegetables, because it can actually stunt the growth. So when we talk about planting, right, we'll go through these cool season selections, and there's going to be a window for planting. And you want your planting to hit when we've had some rainfall, or when when the temperature is going to break a little. You want to hit the end of that window in as much as possible for many things. So, but looking at what we've got here right now would definitely not be the time to plant cabbage or broccoli, or for heaven's sakes, onions. It's still too hot for that. Even peppers are really heavy water users. Okay, so it can be time, and tomatoes too. This one, if this is our time to go, do we need a fall crop of that? Do we, where do we stand with that? Because this may be the year when we don't actually need a fall crop for those things. Is it worth your money? Is it did you can enough from the spring season that it'll carry your family over? That sort of thing. Because really that's the whole point of doing this. I mean, we're doing it for fun and we're doing it for help, but really you're learning skills to be able to feed yourself and your family. So you start having to balance that as the cost of the water going to balance what we're getting out of it. So I love that, if you look at carrots, they're really low water needs. And if you look at beans, they're really low water needs. That's why okra is not on this list, but okra is also very low water needs. That's why right now, the only thing that will grow for you in this heat is really okra and peas. And even the peas are like, oh man, you better give me some water, so you have to balance that out. But so potatoes have a window in August, but they can be really high water needs, right? This may not be the year to start fall potatoes, although I recommend that as a fall crop, because we can have a long fall season with normal rainfall. But if you have plants, this is something I say all the time, what happens to plants that are stressed? Anybody want to jump? Yeah, they're much more prone to disease and insects, right? So you get problems that you normally wouldn't have because they're on their way to dying. And while they are much more prone to stress, and that just makes bigger problems for your garden. Like, not necessarily something you want to go with. So let's start with carrots, right? They are one of the most drought hardy cool season crops, and that's really what we're talking about here, is cool season crops. If you look at when we're sowing seeds for that, the window is August to October, right? And that's because carrots actually take quite a long time to mature, 70 to 100 days. Some of the varieties are even 110. And I can tell you from experience, if you pick them early, it's not pleasant. You only want mature carrots. They do not have any of that lovely sweetness that we enjoy so much when you harvest them early. So that's one of those where you're going to want to look at your seed packets, check the days to harvest, keep an idea of that, because you're only going to want to harvest those when they're mature. If the greens get caught in a freeze, as long as they're deep enough in the soil, it'll regrow greens, right? You won't always have the best, most tender root when you do that from the carrot, but it will survive that and you can still get a crop from that. That is a fun way also to get carrot seeds. If you let it go through its freeze, it'll come back. Carrots are biennials, which means the first year they're not going to make seed for you, but the second year they will. Or the way you short circuit that is to stress them into production. That's what that freeze does. Okay, so something that people don't really think about very often is that carrot greens are edible. Especially with anything, the smaller the green, the more tender it's going to be and the tastier. So you want to look at that from a smaller size if you can. And obviously, if you eat the whole green, you're not going to get a big root because the green is what drives the energy for that. But when you're harvesting them, you can eat the greens. Now, you know how in the refrigerated section at the grocery store, there's that really pretty bundle of carrots that's got all those leaves still attached. It's so pretty and cute. That takes a bunch of water to keep the carrot crisp while the leaves are still attached. At home, when you're harvesting them, the smart thing to do is cut those greens off immediately, because the longer you leave those greens on, the more you're going to get wilt on your carrot. It'll turn softer. Now, that's something not a lot of people know.
Dumb question time.
No dumb questions.
Okay.
All questions are good questions.
I like carrots, but I've never had carrot greens. You put them in salad or what?
Yep. It's not something where you just be like, I just want to eat a big mouthful of carrot greens, but it's a good addition to a salad. And like, especially so if you're thinning them, right, you can eat instead of just throwing away your thinnings. I mean, they don't transplant well, but so suddenly you've got microgreens, right? And that's true of almost all of the fall crops. You know, you sow them and then you thin them. Of course, it depends on the size that you're growing and that sort of thing. The spacing you thin them to, but that's something I didn't put on.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe in the stew too.
Yeah.
Stews
and stir fries are both really good places for those. Something else to consider: if you have clay soil, carrots are not your friends. If you have clay soil, you need to grow those bad boys in a container. So you just need a container that's deeper than 12 inches. An 18-inch container is perfect for carrots. And if you want to, you can get those shorter varieties that are you're not trying to grow a Danvers long, you know, you're growing a little short, tasty one. But yeah, rocky soil and clay soil, not going to be your buddies for these guys. Okay, spinach and Swiss chard, excellent drought hardiness, excellent winter vegetable. Swiss chard is more drought hardy than spinach, but both of them are like champs in your fall season garden. If you look at, you can do seeds or transplants. Your window for that is August to October and February to March. Okay. This is another one of those where when you thin them out, you're just making some microgreens for yourself. That's perfect for stir fries, stews, salads, all of that. So you don't need to let those go to waste at all. These are really cold tolerant. They're cold tolerant down to the mid-20s for Swiss chard and down to 15 for spinach. Now, that being said, if we go from it being, 80 degrees to suddenly it's, 26, that is not going to be happy times. But so hopefully we have some cool nights to kind of bring it down and give it some transfer there. But they handle freezes very well. Both of these are what you call cut and come again, which means you harvest them when the leaves are small. You can do baby spinach, baby Swiss chard. And spinach is fully healthy, even from tiny, but it's best sort of tenderest, tastiest size is about 6 inches tall, a 6-inch leaflet on there. Swiss chard, they make huge leaves, they can. And those leaves would come on anywhere from 45 to 60 days. When it's cool, those are not going to be bitter. In the summertime, a Swiss chard will live all the way into summer. Obviously, when it's hot, you're going to get less good. The flavor is not going to be as good, and the leaves will be smaller. But those are all edible from baby to big. With spinach, the older it gets, especially if it's warmer, it can get bittery. So I recommend cutting your spinach small. It will keep growing for you and keep giving you food that way. The thing about spinach is a heavy feeder, and that means it's going to need more nitrogen in the soil than some of the other ones. So that's something to consider. All of the things that you're growing are going to need some nitrogen, some fertilization. Spinach more than Swiss chard. If we think about what we get out of spinach, though, it's okay that we need to put some in. It's a really nutrient dense vegetable. Kale. Okay, this is the thing that a lot of people love to hate, but kale can be delicious. Okay, here's one of the secrets that people don't know. Kale tastes better after it's been through a frost. It needs a little bit of frost. It changes the alkaloids inside the leaves. It changes the flavor of the alkaloids inside the leaves. So that one's one of those where you're like, okay, maybe I won't pick that so much until it, but it's also a good green to add into things. I've cooked kale with spinach and things like that, and it's a healthy workhorse. Dinosaur kale, which is what's pictured here, it's called that because it looks like reptile skin. Dinosaur kale is the most cold tolerant of all the kales. It's also called Tuscan kale. I believe they have records of growing this kale back to the mid 1700s in Italy, and actually this was grown at Monticello. Whose house was that?
Sure.
Yes, that's right. See, that's from it. But so it was grown at Monticello for all that time. Baby greens, again, eat those baby greens. You can thin it out that way. This is also cut and come again. Harvest them as babies and keep eating them as they grow. So, like I said, it does taste better after frost, but some people don't think it tastes bad anyway. But it's one of those that when it gets hot, it gets bittery.
We make kale chips.
Yeah.
It's like those.
Yeah. So it's a useful tool, right? It's like, these are good for us. So I'm just like, what can I put on them to make them taste good? Where can I hide them? Right. So anyway, but anything that's nutrient dense this way, that's easy to grow. This was still growing happily at Snake Woman's Garden at Caddo Mounds. Last week, we had some blue kale. It wasn't dinosaur kale. It was a blue kale. I can't tell you how it tasted, but it was sitting right out there drought hardy because we don't water much out there because there's a lot of salt in the water. So we actually don't water much. And so we're just letting it until we open the new museum and we have water supply there that's appropriate. We're just kind of letting the garden dry and do what it's doing over the summer. That kale, we were picking it just fine last Wednesday. So it's one of those that can cover a whole lot. It can take a whole lot of abuse. And it doesn't get its feelings hurt when we say, ew, kale. Okay, mustard greens. This is another one that a lot of people love to hate. What's pictured here is curly leaf mustard greens. The curly leaves that have all those ruffles, that does hold dirt. Lots of people, that's the big fuss about mustard greens, is that they're hard to clean. There are varieties that are broadleaf and with a more slick leaf that don't hold dirt quite as well. You're going to be seeding these out in September and October. In the springtime, you would be trying to put out transplants. They like the fall weather much, but they can't handle that hot cold thing that happens really well for us in the springtime. That's why springtime you're doing transplants, but in the fall you would be seeding them out. They're also cut and come again, lots of different varieties. So good things. Baby greens you can start eating about the time they're 20 days old. Again, you can turn your thinnings into microgreens. This is another one of those that I generally recommend mixing in. Mustard greens can be an acquired taste because they do have that kind of peppery, presence. These are frost tolerant, but not freeze tolerant. A lot of the cool season crops are actually freeze tolerant, and we'll take it down to the mid-20s. Mustard greens, not so much. They'll take that frost, but a freeze is going to get them. Okay, garden peas. Now, this is one of those that I don't think we grow enough of, okay? Beans and legumes, we were just talking before about how drought hardy legumes are, right? They are a workhorse in the garden. And garden peas, which we also would call English peas, are no different, really. They just cannot tolerate warm temperatures. And that's the thing that we have excessively here. So it's one of those where you pick the window where you're growing it, where it's not going to be too hot for it. Okay. That's the whole big deal. So we can sow seeds anywhere between August and October or January to February. The vines are frost and light freeze tolerant. The flowers aren't. So if you've got vines and we get a frost or freeze, you're going to lose your flowers, but your vines are going to come out and reflower. Okay. And I saw that in my neighbor's garden. I guess it got into the high 20s. And those vines were like, all right, we can still do it, bring it on. So that's something to keep in mind. I get a lot of questions about what's what with English peas. And you'll hear people refer to English peas as sweet peas because the fruit itself is actually sweeter than some of our other garden peas. But sweet peas are actually a complete other thing that is totally not edible. It's an ornamental flower. So garden peas and English peas are the same things. They do come in sort of 3 different categories. English peas, that's where we are eating just a pea, right? That's LeSueur. They've got a great market on those tiny little English peas that are really good. So sugar snap peas are the pods and the peas, where you're eating the pods and the peas together, right? And snow peas are where you're eating just the pods, okay, before the peas mature. Now, there are some varieties that can be both sugar snap and English peas, and some varieties where you can even do the early pod and have it be all 3. But you're looking at varietal selection there. Wando is one of those that performs well in the heat, but is generally only harvested as the pea, the English pea. But there are some great varieties that do the pods and the peas together, and even the snow pea by itself. So in case you ever wondered what was the difference between sugar snaps and snow peas, it's all the part of it that you're eating. So like I said, they're frost and light freeze tolerant. You don't want to eat the yellow pods. Okay, it's like yellow snow. You don't want to go there. So once the pods have turned yellow, the peas inside of them are fibrous and no longer worth eating. So the only thing you would be doing that is saving it for seed. And you would let it fully dry, and then you could cook it that way, the same way you, buy them in the store that way dried. But you wouldn't necessarily pick the pod and eat them while the pod was still. That's one of those situations where like you go, okay, I'm gonna leave you over there and let you do what you're gonna do. This is another one where it's important to water these guys in the morning. You do not want to have water sitting on those leaves overnight. That's something that you want to consider there. It's a great garden vegetable and not hard to grow and actually really pretty. It's good for a fall crop. Lots of people miss this window for when to plant it. It's just not something we really think about, but it's a great fall crop for us. They're pretty drought hardy. You're going to need to have some moisture there for that initial growth. If you soak the seeds first for 12 to 24 hours, you'll usually get super fast germination, which means less water to the soil, right? But so those initial seedlings you're going to need to keep those watered, but over time, this is a pretty drought hardy crop. Okay, Brussels sprouts and parsley. How many of you guys eat Brussels sprouts? Good. Yeah. Have you grown them yourself?
I've tried,
Right.
but they rotted on the stalk.
Okay. Were you growing them in the fall or in the spring?
It was the not fall.
Right. So Brussels sprouts are not recommended for spring planting. You'll see on our planting list that's available a date, that's a window where you can plant them. But actually, you are going to be dissatisfied with the end product as compared to planting it in the fall. So you don't want to water on the plant, right? It could have been if there was heavy dew set or if you were sprinkling them, that will cause rot on the plant that way. So we don't want to do that. But that's what you see there. This is growing up. I took this picture at our demonstration garden. And so you've got little heads there that are well into ready to harvest. If you're growing them in the spring and you let it go too long, it's going to get bitter. They can have a really bittery flavor. And so we don't really want that. Nobody wants that. So, but it is very nice, cold hardy into the mid-20s. So the fall is a good time to grow this. It does take about 80 days to harvest. So that's something to consider there. Definitely something you would plant in the fall for that way. They're also heavy feeders and they're not drought tolerant. Okay. All of the cruciferous vegetables, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, collard greens, the crucifers are heavier feeders. Collard greens are, and not drought tolerant at all. They're thirsty as well. Collard greens, the least of all of those because they're not trying to make a head. You're just picking the leaves and eating them. So if you're looking in mind at drought hardiness, collard greens would be the way that you would go for that.
Okay, and again, by heavy feeders, you mean fertilizer and a lot of water.
That means fertilizer. Feeding heavy feeders, it means fertilizer. I'm sorry I wasn't more clear, but that means they're going to need more fertilizer, more side dressing as they grow. So anytime you plant them, like if you're planting, I'm assuming you would be planting transplants because when I go by those, I'm buying transplants. You would do like 3/4 cup of dilute fertilizer solution in your hole where you plant your transplant, or you're going to have tilled in some fertilizer, or you're using a mix of compost and soil together. So there needs to be something initially for the plants to grow on.
Okay, if you're using
And
start off with your really good compost.
Yeah.
Later on in its life, you need to add a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. As the heads, especially as the head starts to form, you would start side dressing from there. And you want to, it's always best to do a mix of like half compost, half soil. Because if you do all compost, it's really easy to kill your plants with kindness. But that's actually a really good question. So not drought hardy is where the lots of water comes in, and yes, they need it. I think if you look at the beginning page, it says you need about 20 to 25 gallons per growing season. Or 20, I'd have to look at the beginning again. But they are one of the least drought hardy crops. All of the cold crops are like, oh, that printed very oddly. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, inches per season. So thankfully that's not gallons. But anyway, that's a lot of rainfall compared to the none we're getting now.
And forgive me, when you say side dressing, you just mean that fertilizing after they've already started growing.
Exactly. And if it was granular, it would literally be on the side. Like you would move over 6 inches from your main stem, 6 to 8 inches, and or possibly even 10, depending on how long you wait. But and dig a little trench and do your granular fertilizer in that trench beside, and you cover it. If you're doing water soluble like Miracle-Gro or something like that, you would not have to worry about side dressing. You would just water it in the soil in the root zone. Yeah, so yeah, if you're doing it in the, then of course right now having a drip system is the best way to go. And you would there are fertigators that help you do that in the beginning. You know, you can just, it's basically siphoning it from a bucket to go into your watering system.
You know, earlier you mentioned nitrogen primarily. Is there a particular mix you recommend?
Actually, for side dressing, nitrogen is the primary thing that they need.
Okay.
At the beginning is where you would do some of the balanced fertilizer for you, and it would depend on what you were. If you were trying to grow roots or get blooms, you would do like a 10-20-10 at the very beginning. But if you're just trying to grow leaves and stem, you would do, you know, like 15-5-10 or something like that. And that's at the very beginning in the soil. The balance of compost is roughly like sort of like 1-to-1-ish, depending on what you've got. They're very low percent of things, but that's your basic ratio.
What's the difference between 1-to-1 and 10-20-10?
None. It's exact same ratio, except compost has only like 1% of that volume, you know, per volume. It's got a much lower amount of nitrogen in there as compared to the granular fertilizer itself, or the blended fertilizer that you get, but it's the exact same ratio. Make sense? Ish. As much as any of that does to me. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Out of these vegetables, what do deers not like?
What? Oh, ma'am, I am so sorry. Deer do not like it 22, 30-06, 410. They're really allergic to those.
6.
Yeah, a bow. But right now, when there's a drought, there is basically nothing deer won't eat. Deer don't like really aromatic things. So if you had something that you really
Like marigold or something?
rosemary, what, basil, but I was thinking of that tougher leaf. It's just a flower. It's a native. Hummingbirds love it. Lantana. Yeah, so that's another one, and you can sort of bring something you want to protect, but short of a fence that they can't jump over, and you can hot wire it. That helps. But he could tell you the whole story, Mr. Jason over there can tell you the whole story of how deer will eat it no matter what, unless you can keep them out of it. And especially in a drought season, I mean, really, there's nothing to say. So that's hard. That's hard when you, especially when we're investing so much in protecting it. So putting up a fence, is where you might want to go with that. Like I said, you can do a solar hot wire fence pretty well, except now people are even having to water their ground rods because it's so dry. Yeah, so our secretary had to go around watering the ground rods on their hot wire fence because it's literally that dry. It wouldn't hold a charge. So it's no doubt, right? But so those are all really good concerns. And this is one of those years, lots of people who normally did not have problems with things eating their watermelons or eating their cantaloupes and things like that, absolutely are having problems with that. And while we're talking, you guys that are there online, if y'all have a question, you can unmute and ask it or type it into the chat box and Susie will catch it for me.
We do have one.
Okay.
It's not a question, it's a comment that, has had that greens can be hidden in smoothies.
Oh, cool. Gross. That's not very well hidden, Vera. I'd have to drink that smoothie. Vera Smith was saying you could put them in smoothies, and that is a thing you can do. That is a thing you can do, and some people find that delicious. And that is a very good point, Vera. So,
I've got a question.
mhm.
What makes carrots sweet?
Mhm.
To not sweet?
Okay, so so there are alkaloids in any plant that's growing. It's like the plant chemicals that are growing there. And sometimes it's temperature and sometimes it's maturity. It's like the difference between a green tomato having a tart, tangy flavor versus a ripe tomato that's sweeter. And it has to do with sunshine and the weather interacting with the chemicals that are in that carrot.
So the soil isn't really the.
It can be. There are some things that if it's not present, you won't get that sweet flavor. But like with fruit, usually it involves sunflower. It involves sun. But yes, you're looking at for balance in the soil micronutrients too. If it was watermelons, it would be some things like manganese and things like that. So it depends on the crop, but basically it's the plant chemicals that make that change as it matures. It's just like we have our hormones that trigger changes. It's the same thing for plants too, oddly enough. That's a really good question. Okay, moving on, broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower, which literally is the exact same plant, just different varieties. They are all the same genus and species, just different varieties. The thing I like about cauliflower is that it doesn't have to be gross and white. To me, cauliflower is a useful vehicle for ranch and cheese. But that really takes away from the health value of it. So, you can go different. So as we talked about in our Master Gardener meeting today, this purple cauliflower is going to have different vitamins in it for you than white cauliflower would. Not that white cauliflower doesn't, but you get a different dose of some things from this. So I think that's cool. Cabbage, you can either eat loose leaf cabbage or head cabbage, either way. And of course, broccoli. The fun parts that we're eating with cabbage, it just makes a head and it's still the leaves. But with cauliflower and broccoli, what we're actually eating are the florets. It's the fluorescence of those, which is beautiful and fascinating to me. So they're really cold tolerant. That's their claim to fame. Like these guys can generally take a big hit down into the mid-20s. In general, cabbage is more cold tolerant than the others. But as you can see, and this is the reason I use this picture, they've got that mulch with straw. Okay, so if we were gonna have a big freeze, where this is always the question, like, it says we might get down to 21, should I mulch my fill in the blank? And like, when in doubt, mulch it out. But then you have to go through and, uncover it and do that fun thing that we do in East Texas, which is, it's hot today, cold tonight. The fun thing that I really like about these is that you can eat the baby leaves, and you can eat the leaves when you harvest them. So broccoli will continue to grow leaves. One of my good friends, Julianne, was growing something in her backyard, and she's like, I don't know what this is. I just planted it and I've just been eating the leaves, but look, it's making this thing. And I'm like, oh, that's a broccoli head. So, but she's like, oh, can you? I'm like, well, it hasn't killed you, but so broccoli leaves are edible. They're totally edible as baby greens. Absolutely good and fine. I know, right? It was funny, but because nobody thinks about eating the leaves from that, but the broccoli and the cauliflower leaves can absolutely be eaten. And that's something to consider when we got that last freeze, the notice of that last freeze last year. My broccoli heads were not mature, but I harvested what I had because I knew I didn't have anything to protect them down into that 20 and 19 that we got. So I just harvested what I had, and I could have taken the greens and everything and used all of it. I just harvested the broccoli because it's my son's favorite. So yes, sir.
Garlic, yellow garlic and regular garlic.
Yes, sir.
When's the time I didn't see
Okay,
it
so
anywhere on
planting.
here.
Well, so garlic is one of those that kind of doesn't, it's not a standard crop, so it doesn't fall in the crop sheet that way. But in general, you are going to plant it in the fall and harvest it in the spring. Let me go.
Okay.
You're gonna plant it in the fall and harvest it in the spring.
Zoom meeting,
I'm gonna go meet them.
council Zoom meeting.
That feeds from.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Okay. Anyway, so all right, so what were we talking about? Oh, garlic. When to plant garlic. So in general, you plant it in the fall and you harvest it in the spring. The reason we harvest it in the spring is obviously that's when it blooms. You can catch it before it blooms and does that, or you can wait till the blooms lay over and harvest it then. But in general, why it's that time is because we tend to have heavy spring rains and it will rot it. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether it's elephant garlic or regular garlic, hard neck versus soft neck.
Okay, and you can save the pods or the
Mhm.
whatever you call the things and closed and plant them next fall. There would be just keep
Right.
them.
So I actually, when I harvest mine, I put some bulbs right back into the soil,
Okay,
but I'm growing it in raised beds.
yeah.
You have it growing out here, right?
That's what
So-
I'm gonna do.
Just put it, it'll come with some bulbils that are not fully developed cloves. It's just a little chunk of, in 2 years, this will be a garlic.
Okay.
And you just put those back out in your bed and a couple of your cloves.
Yeah. So
And
it's
you'll be good to go.
it's a crop you don't rotate. It's just something that stays in
Mm-hmm.
its own bed.
Yeah, it's generally antifungal and antibacterial. And so, in fact, you can grow it around some things that have disease problems to kind of theoretically slow that down.
So it's okay to put garlic bulbs out in amongst other things.
Yeah, your only concern would be what's gonna happen when you're pulling your garlic bulbs.
Yeah, well,
I planted it around my roses and just let it grow. I never harvested it. I just let it do its thing out there and I don't really harvest it. But if I'm gonna plant it somewhere where I'm gonna harvest it, I'm not gonna plant it around perennials. But absolutely, you can just plant it and let it do its thing. In some years you may harvest all of it, and some years not. But if you're well drained enough, it won't rot there. It's a good question. Okay, this is something that I just found interesting. I don't know if you've ever asked yourself, what is celeriac anyway? But I have, because I'm a weirdo. You sound like, is celery and celeriac the same thing? No, they're not. Just like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage are all the same genus species, but different variety. Celery and celeriac are the same genus species, but different variety. Celeriac is grown for the root. Celery is grown for the stalk. Traditionally, those are cool season crops, and we can grow them. But celery is basically the blueberry of crop vegetables, which means it's really thirsty, really thirsty. So this would not be the season to grow celery. Celeriac will grow for us. There's a recommended variety on your plant list. So it will grow. Don't ask me how it tastes because I've never tried it. I do think it's interesting. Celery seed in and of itself has a lot of really good properties when you cook with it and that sort of thing. So any interesting side note there. Also, beets and Swiss chard. Beets are another great winter crop for us if you like them. They can be troublesome to germinate. That's usually when people have their problem is getting them to germinate. So you just want to follow some specific crop directions, make sure the seeds stay wet enough, that sort of thing. But beets and Swiss chard are actually the same genus and species, Beta vulgaris. They're just different varieties. Swiss chard does not make a bulb at all, right? It does not have that main taproot. Okay. Sort of like it's that variety. It's been bred out of that. Whereas beets are definitely have that root. You can eat the greens of both. You can eat beet greens. They're better than the root, in my opinion. but they're not as healthy. They're healthy, but they're not as healthy. Beets, there are few things in the world. It's kale and beets. If you could grow those, and okra. Kale, beets, and okra. If you could grow them and tolerate them, you would be so healthy. Yeah, exactly, right?
I'm the only one to eat them.
That's all right.
So on the subject of beets,
Uh-huh.
as far as hardiness
Mhm.
and are they thirsty? Do they need more? How do they rate?
So they're pretty drought hardy. They're on the drought hardy list, but anything that's making a bulb is gonna take the food.
Yep.
Okay, it's a bulb, so you're looking to start it out with a 10-20-10, and usually that type of fertilizer, that type of ratio percentage, that's a 1-to-1, 1-to-1. But the best way to put that in, if you're gonna do it, is put it so that the roots are gonna grow into it. Because phosphorus, which is what those plants need to make that big bulb, that's what produces lots of blooms and big roots, does not move in the soil the way nitrogen does. You can water nitrogen in, and if we get a big rain and you put out your nitrogen, it goes over there, yeah, wherever the water flows, your nitrogen is go with it. And also the potassium to some degree, not as much as the nitrogen. So those are the N, that's the N and the K, but the phosphorus, the P in the middle, does not move. So that needs to be where the roots will grow into it. That's why I recommend putting that right where, if you're putting in a transplant, either you're transplanting into a good compost mix there, or you've got something mixed into your soil, or you're using a dilute liquid solution. Good question. Yes, turnips can be the same way. Excellent greens. Turnips are extremely drought hardy. Of course, we know in the heat, the turnip greens are going to get really bittery, but that's actually a wonderful cool season crop. So not listed on here, but that's just for lack of time and, you know, opportunity to talk about them.
Kim,
Yes, ma'am?
you have a question?
Yes, ma'am?
Since one of your slides mentioned parsley.
Oh, yes, yes. One of my slides did mention parsley. Thank you. We had questioned, I forgot about it. So parsley isn't traditionally a vegetable, but it's one of those things that is a useful vehicle from a health perspective. It's got a lot of really strong health benefits, and it is a cool season crop and will overwinter for us. Curly parsley does great in a winter garden, frequently untouched by our winters. So if you use parsley, or
It's drought tolerant too, because mine
Yes.
is still alive and I've.
Right. so parsley is one of those things that's can be really useful and grows really well for us. So that's why I threw it on there. It's cool season and warm season. So something to make note of. It's on one of your slides. So on this, I do have a link here. I've been talking a little bit about vegetable variety selection. And that's what I had on there. And I'm going to, these guys here that are with me in the office have the printout of it. And I'm going to put it in the chat box for you guys online. Now, this is by no means a solid list of every variety that can or should be grown in Cherokee County. Okay, it's not. But it is a place to start. So this is what I'm talking about here. Do all of you guys have one of these? Did you get? Okay, here. Did you get one?
I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, so that's something that you guys can use there. So most of this stuff, it's not like how it is with fruit trees where you really need to know what you want before you go in to get it, because they'll sell you a lot of things at nurseries. By and large, the vegetable varieties that we have here, other than strawberry varieties, generally will grow really well here. And if the strawberry variety is Chandler, that will also grow. So that's pretty commonly what's offered up. But, oh, wow. Vera just said that Lindale has announced no outside watering except for livestock. So this is where it's important, because we're getting into that point as water restrictions, because obviously people are more important than your lawn. But if what you're watering is, oh, well, poo. Okay. So if what you're watering is your food, that's a whole different thing. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay, and get back to where you guys can see me. And I'm just going to show you how I Googled that. So let me go back to the Zoom and share my screen. Okay, so when I do I just do a vegetable variety selector AgriLife. Boom. Okay, and that's actually the very first thing that comes up, vegetable variety selector. Okay, and you can do it by region. You can do it by county. Are you guys seeing this online? Did the page turn to the vegetable variety selector? Yes. Okay, good. So you can just pick your county and have it searched by a county, or you can do by region. You would scroll down to your right county and put that in. If you wanted to look up what grew in someone, you know, recommendations for other counties, you'd have that there. So I can look up a specific vegetable if I'm only interested in pea varieties. I can pull that up here. Or if I want to look at all of them, I would do select all varieties, and it brings this out. And you can download this as a PDF if you want to. and do it that way. So like I said, these guys have that printed out, and I do have some at the office here. Thanks for stopping. Thanks, Vera. I appreciate that. Thanks for stopping by. We're about done anyway. So, yes, sir.
Cilantro.
Uh-huh.
I planted it in the spring, it bolted and dried out.
Right.
Is it a fall?
Yes, cilantro is a cool season crop. The good news is the seeds from where it bolted out made coriander for you. That's actually a spice called coriander, but you can replant those this fall. It'll actually overwinter. I didn't put that on there because I didn't really go into spices, but coriander prefers cool season. I actually had coriander that overwintered 2021 that lived through Snowmageddon at the Caddo Mounds Garden. So
You go, it's perennial.
I know, right? But here it's cool season. It's a cool season. Okay.
From the sidewalk.
All right. So, do you guys, anybody have any other questions? Because that's sort of where we are with things right now. I was just going through, we've just taken about an hour of the day. We do have lots of information. There is a planting guide, which the link is at the back of your, it's at the back of your slide set. It shows you where to go to the link to do that. You can copy and paste that. Thanks, Lynn. I appreciate that. So that's a place where you can go to get that. And if you guys here don't have it, we can make that happen for you. I think I still have some printed out. And so, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, Jackie went down to feed the